I'm Bre'Anna. I'm the owner and the baker of Blck Cocoa Bakes, which is a vegan producer, well, a producer of vegan baked goods. We don't have a storefront, but we do work out of a commercial kitchen in Plymouth, and we sell to a couple of vegan restaurants in Midtown, like Chili Mustard and Onions and Street Beat. We do online orders for delivery and pickup from our production space in Plymouth. And now we are teaching this cooking class. And I thought of making cornbread because that's the first thing I learned how to bake. I kind of cheated because I was using Jiffy. I always baked cornbread. Every Saturday, I would go to my grandma's house. She would always have a can of tuna fish, and she would have cornbread mix. And because I was an only child and slightly mischievous, I would wander in the kitchen and I would just read the directions. I'm like, oh, I can make this. And I would just go and mix it up, and that would be like my lunch every Saturday. And on Sundays, I was fortunate enough to have my great grandparents who were much older than my grandparents. And my nanny, she would make stovetop cornbread in a cast iron pan. It would be a little bit burnt on the edges or on the sides, or she would make Johnny cake, which I believe is the cornbread pancake situation. And I remember just being a kid, just watching her cook it. And I would like get down close to the stove and like watch the bubbles come up. It was just like, I just loved cornbread. And that's one of the main baked items that I ever seen made, because that's just what my family made. Like, they weren't really into cakes. My mom was like a single working mom, so she wasn't baking. So I had to keep the cornbread tradition going by making Jiffy. And now we're going to make vegan cornbread for you guys. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Sweet. Could you also tell us a little bit about your journey towards becoming a vegan, or like vegan cooking?
Yeah. So I have always loved cooking, and I kind of journeyed away from cooking as I got older. I wanted to be a chef. And I stopped wanting to be a chef because one of my main mentors, of which is my uncle, he passed away. Ironically, his picture is in the back. He was an artist. My grandma, she like gave it to me. So he was an artist, and he was like my mentor, and he would like push me and help me like be more creative. And that's what motivated me to cook. So when he passed away, like I started writing and I became a journalist and doing food photography like over the years as I got older. And then when I got to college, I was working at the newspaper. I worked at the Detroit Free Press as a sports editor.
Sweet.
And like I had like crazy health problems. I was on like steroids for asthma, and I had headaches all the time. I was just very unhealthy and unhappy. So I was like, well, I tried everything else. I've always been kind of like a self-starter and like would try different diets or whatever as a teenager. When I was 10, I had like a diet and I would only eat like Go-Gurt, and I would make like baked chicken or something. I was just trying everything. So then I went vegan, and the first time I made something, I was like, oh my God, this is so much fun. Like, why haven't I been doing this? Why haven't I been cooking all of these years? And I remembered, oh, it's because you lost motivation. So becoming vegan made me feel a sense of urgency, a sense of creativity, and kind of thinking outside the box. I never felt like I was losing something, like, oh, I can't eat this, oh, I can't eat that. I was like, no, like I have this vegetable, and you can make it this way. Or I just felt like so creative, and it made me excited.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in 2013, still vegan. So I think it's been almost 9 years. Yeah. I think it'll be 9 years in March. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it. It can be a challenge, but it's only because I'm a perfectionist and, you know, but if it's like a rainy day, I just want Mediterranean food and like a smoothie. Like it just makes me happy. Those are yeah. So yeah, that's my journey.
Sweet. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Um, so we're gonna get started with the recipe, and as usual, I'm gonna
Okay.
email it out to folks afterwards.
Okay.
Bre'Anna put together a really lovely recipe for us.
Yeah.
And as Bre'Anna's showing us how to make her cornbread, feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to read them out loud to her. Um,
Yeah.
Also, we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end as well.
Yes. Okay. So I preface this cornbread by saying that it's super easy and it is very versatile in a sense that you can add things to it. When Lola sends out the recipe, there are chef notes. So if you do not want to use a specific ingredient such as sugar, there will be cane sugar in this recipe. You can use maple syrup or agave, and if you're not vegan, honey instead. And I'll also include a couple tips as we go. Yeah, so let's get started. So the first thing are just the simple fact of assembling your ingredients, mise en place, which means everything in place, kind of like a chefy phrase. You want to assemble everything before you get started. And on the recipe, I have your wet and dry ingredients in two separate columns. I just think looking at a recipe with wet and dry separate makes it so much easier so you know what goes where. So for this recipe, I'm gonna have measuring cups for our dry ingredients. I'm using a Pyrex for wet ingredients. One note, anything like this, these Pyrex containers, these measure cups by volume. These, this measures by mass. So when for your wet ingredients, please, if you have this, use one of these instead of this because they're not exactly the same. And that will change the outcome of any recipe you do because volume is not measured the same way as mass or dry ingredients, I guess. So you got two bowls here.
You
Yeah,
ever like to use a scale to measure things out?
always. This time we're not using a scale. This is like my first recipe, but I generally never use measuring cups, and especially because I bake for production. So it's so much easier and extremely calculated and methodical because I can scale a recipe literally by multiplying it one times, two times, and the recipe, for the most part, will come out exactly the same because it's in grams and they're so small that the accuracy is much higher. Like when you get to like that accuracy with baking. But when you're at home and you just want to take it easy, and then you don't have a scale, if you have these two things, or even um, if you have a mason jar, sometimes they have like 1 cup, 2 cup on it. You can use that. So if you're at home, you just have wet and dry measuring devices, use those. But yes, scales, I love scales. They're my favorite. So we got two bowls here, which you could honestly use this guy if if it's big enough. So for our ingredients that we're using 1 1/4 cup of cornmeal, and we are going to use 2 1/2 cups of all-purpose unbleached flour. It's important to use unbleached flour because the the remaining minerals that are in the flour, I noticed that things bake differently with those things left behind. It's not as dense as whole wheat flour, but it does, for some odd reason, it just really adds to the texture. If you use bleach flour that's super refined, and there's no other minerals or fibers left behind, it comes out flatter, more dense. I don't know why. So you're gonna use 2 1/2 cups of flour. You're going to use 3 tablespoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of baking powder, excuse me. Not baking soda. Don't use baking soda, baking powder. Sorry, I always get those two mixed up. And then you're going to use a tablespoon and a half of salt. So for our wet ingredients, which I already have measured out here, you're going to use 1 3/4 cups of water, room temp water, not too cold, not too hot, and a half a cup of coconut oil. In my chef notes, if you don't want to use coconut oil, I'm using virgin, so it does have a slight coconut flavor. If you don't want to use that, please use some of the things I suggested below. You can use vegan butter if you'd like. You're going to use 2 tablespoons of vinegar. That vinegar is going to react with our baking powder. It's going to make it nice and fluffy. So I do have here my flour, and it's not measured out because I just want to show you something which is super important. So when you measure your flour, what I want you to do is take your 1 cup, and I want you to fluff the flour up. Just get it a little light, because who knows the last time you baked it. The flour may have settled and it's more weighed down. So I just want you to fluff it up. Just lighten it up a little bit, because what that is going to do is when you go ahead and get your cup full, it's going to lighten the flour up and it's going to give you a more exact measurement. And you're going to use a knife and level it off. So if you did not fluff your flour and you go in, you may be more heavy-handed than the other. That's quite all right. You just take a huge lump full and you try to level it off. This, by weight, may be more than when you fluff your flour. And please do the same for your cornmeal, because it's going to give you a more exact finished product.
This is actually so important because there's a Christmas cookie recipe from my dad's side of the family that I had been making since I was a kid, and I this year was the second time I had tried to make it on my own, and just the difference in texture of dough between like scooping it out or like how you showed and like fluffing it first, it made a world of a difference in the dough. So thanks for sharing that.
And that, when you start getting into, if you start using a scale, that kind of goes out of the window, because it is by weight and you're using a machine to measure the how much mass of flour you have. But when you're using a measuring cup, fluffing it out is going to give you a more universal 1 cup equation around the board. So that's super important. Because, if you're just like, ooh, let me make this cornbread, you scoop, you'll come out with like 3 cups instead of 2.5 or 2 1/4. And like, wait, this is not what we want. So
I also had a question about the salt that you use. Do you have a preference for like kosher salt or sea salt?
So
because of it?
I personally like using Himalayan sea salt. Like, I just feel like the level of saltiness, if that makes sense, it just works for me. Like, I just really enjoy it. I'm not really akin to using iodized salt, because it's just, I don't know, it's just salt forward, but it doesn't have the same flavor. And I know that sounds silly because it is simply salt, but when you're using it in a recipe, and at times if you're balancing a little sweetness with a little saltiness, which is the case in this recipe, I just think that sea salt gives it like a little oomph. So that's my preference, but please use what you feel comfortable with. If you have that on hand. If you're using like table salt, iodized salt, you may want to just go with like 1 1/4 teaspoon. Oh, and also if you're using vegan butter, or butter that is salted, please don't put the salt, because then it'll be like, this is too salty. Somebody get me some water. So before we get started with mixing our ingredients, because it's going to come together really fast, on the recipe that Lola's going to send you, we have a leek and garlic version for our cornbread. and I just want to show you guys how to prepare it. Now, Keep Growing Detroit has such beautiful leeks and vegetables, but I don't think they're in season right now and you can't find them there, go to the grocery store and get yourself some. So for this recipe, we're going to be using 1.5 cups of cooked leeks. So for your leeks, this is going to be your green part, and this is the bottom part. This is way more oniony than this part, but we want to use both. And I just want to quickly show you how to prepare it, because leeks are super dirty. They grow in sandy soil, and I just want to quickly show you how we're going to prepare it. So you got your cutting board. You're going to cut your leek down the center. Probably be better to use this one. Make sure those thumbs are tucked in. We don't want any cut fingers. You're going to cut it in half. So you're going to do half moons in our cornbread. And these are pretty big leaves. So I'm going to do that again to make these a little bit smaller. But if you're a leek lover like I am, you could do big or small. And we're just going to simply slice these up. And when I worked at Blck in Corktown, we had to like caramelize leeks, and they were just so beautiful and fragrant. And this is the way Chef Jesse told me how to clean my leeks. So we're going to cut them first. Just take your time. No rush. I'm a pretty avid cutter. I love cutting things up. Uh-oh, we got a little leek confetti party over here. And then what I want you to do is get a cup of water, and you're going to put your leeks in the water to let them soak for a few minutes. And you just want to do that to kind of get some of that sand out of them and that grit, because we don't want that in our cornbread. That's not where it's at. So you're going to let those sit for a few minutes, and you can kind of agitate the water, and that's just going to clean them. And on our recipe, I have you to cook them for about 3 minutes. We just want to get a little bit of the green color going, just get some of that chlorophyll out. Chlorophyll. Yeah, chlorophyll. I was going to say chlorella, but that's definitely a seaweed. Get some of the chlorophyll going, so you're going to get a bright green color. And we just want to cook it just slightly in a tablespoon of oil if you prefer, just to kind of get some of the raw onion taste out. And the rest is going to go in your cornbread and good to go. So to make the cornbread, the main event, let's get to it. This recipe comes together super duper fast. It is a joy. I thoroughly enjoy making it. So I have my coconut oil, water, and my vinegar. In my chef notes, I suggest, if you'd like, you can use non-dairy milks such as coconut milk, oat milk, cashew milk, and that's basically going to coat the flour, the fat from the coconut oil or whatever other oil, and the fatty milk is going to coat each little strand, each little bit of your flour, and it's going to make it even more moist. But this is your super cheap, super easy, super yummy cornbread. So we're going to start here. So we're going to put our wet ingredients in a bowl. In another bowl, we're going to combine our dry ingredients. And mine's already pre-measured out. So what I'm going to do, and it says so in the recipe, we're going to fluff it out. And we're doing this to incorporate our baking soda, our baking powder, keep saying baking soda, baking powder, salt, our little bit of sugar, and our flour. If you want to be fancy, which this is totally a non-fancy, dishwasher-friendly recipe, you can use a sifter, and the sifter is going to lighten it up and combine this mixture even more. But in my testing, this has done the trick. And I've added sugar to this recipe, just a little, because of course in my nostalgia for Jiffy cornbread, it was slightly sweet. And of course I always added more because I was a kid. And the salt and the sweet with the corn, They're just very, very happy people together. So now we're gonna drop all of our dry ingredients into our wet, and we're gonna mix this. And this is gonna come together very fast. This batter is quite thick. Don't be afraid of the thickness of it because it's going to come out fine. You're going to start to see some bubbles happening because the baking powder and the vinegar are starting to react. And we just want to fold and stir just to make sure that we don't have any pockets of flour. And it's going to be kind of a light and fluffy yet thick mixture. And it comes together really fast. So at this point in the recipe, for the variations, if you want to use the sweet version, which is a lemon cornbread, go ahead and put in your zested lemon and your juice of lemon and the rest of your sugar. And then we're going to dish it up. For our savory cornbread, which is what we're going to make today, I'm going to add in my cooked leeks, just plain cooked leeks. You don't need any extra salt. And then, where's my other ingredient? Oh my God, I forgot to put the cornmeal in. How could I do such a thing? Whoopsie. We're gonna add that in now. And I'm gonna add in nutritional yeast and garlic. And what that is going to do is give it a slightly nutty, cheesy taste to kind of complement the leeks. And the garlic is gonna give it a sweet aroma to go with the corn. Now, because I'm a teacher newbie and I forgot to put in my cornmeal, I'm going to give this a little love and extra stir action. And this actually gives you a more accurate representation of what the batter is going to be like. It's going to be super thick. Now, if you feel afraid that, okay, this looks like dough, this does not look like cornbread, what is this, Bre'Anna? Don't be afraid. If you feel very afraid, don't be. But if you still feel afraid, what you can do is add a little more water, but not much. But because I made an oopsie daisy, I'm going to add slightly more water, which is not necessary.
How do you know when the batter is done being mixed? By like sight or feel?
So in the recipe, I say kind of the same thing. The recipe comes out, it's going to be thick. Once you stop seeing the aeration of the bubbles forming and it's just a thick homogeneous mixture, it's got a little bit of a stretch to it. Not much, but just a little. You know it's done. It only takes about 2 to 3 minutes, and it honestly depends on how much elbow grease you're giving it, but it's pretty straightforward. So we're making this in an 8x8 pan, which most people have at home. If you don't, or if you prefer muffins, I have my muffin tin here. One thing I also forgot to note in my teaching newbiness, please preheat your oven. That's super important, right? So yeah, preheat your oven. In my chef notes, I have it at 335, and that's because I'm using a convection electric fan oven. A lot of people may not have that. I'm greasing my pan as we speak. If you have a conventional oven, please just go ahead and use 350. So I'm gonna grease this up. I noticed that every oven is slightly different. And like I said, I put that in my chef notes. You know your oven best. If you know it cooks hotter on one side, or everything you cook on 350 seems to cook really fast, just go ahead and turn it down a notch. Cooking is all about nuance, and that nuance sometimes does not require you to go by the rules of the recipe. You just know for yourself. So I'm going to pour my batter in, and as you can see, it's super thick, but fear not. This is not your Jiffy cornbread. This is Blck Cocoa Bakes cornbread. I'm going to save a little because I'm going to show you how to put it into a muffin tin. You're going to use the back of your spoon, And we're just gonna spread this out.
Did you grease the pan with coconut oil?
Yes, I use coconut oil, which I noticed with this recipe, you don't really get the coconut taste, but it gives it a different type of butteriness that you get with butter. And I really like that. But I suggest in my chef notes that you can use grapeseed oil, you can use avocado oil. I wouldn't use olive oil because that flavor is pretty strong. You want a neutral oil, or vegan butter if you want. So this would then go into the oven between 25-30 minutes. And if you are making it as a muffin, you're gonna get a tablespoon. My tablespoon. And I would like you to add about 3 tablespoons of this mixture into each of your muffin molds. Uh-oh, something fell down. So yeah. Sorry if that hurt your ears, guys. I have a whole kitchen set up in my back porch and there's a lot of stuff back here. So yeah, we're gonna do about 3 heaping tablespoons in each of your muffin tins. And these will cook between 15 and 20 minutes. It just depends on your oven. Keep an eye on it. Best way to tell, do the old knife trick. Stick it through. And if it pulls out clean, you know it's done. This mixture, when it's cooked, it's not going to brown too much. So don't be afraid. But it is going to come out done. So I'm going to show you our finished product. And this is it. Our lovely cornbread. So when it's done cooking, you may have a bumpy top here. Do not fear. I know it doesn't look like regular cornbread, but it's fine. It's super delicious. And it's very moist and flaky. This is kind of what it looks like if you can see it here. So it's super moist. You can warm it up for a second in the microwave or oven. Really good. And then our leek version here, so it gives it like a pretty green color, like you have speckles of green. My grandma, she really likes the leek version. I like the plain version. That's just the one I like, but it's up to you. But yeah, like the coconut oil, I just really like it. Very good. So yeah, it's a super, super easy recipe. Cooks up fast. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the role of vinegar in the recipe?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that before.
So when you are, oh, I see something in the chat. Hi, Phoebe. I didn't see your full chat, but I do like using Bob's Red Mill gluten-free cornbread mix. It works really good. But I will answer your question in a second. So with the vinegar, because we don't have egg as a leavening agent, what egg does, it works as an emulsifier and it works as a way to lift up your mixture. And that is what creates a cakey, muffiny, cornbready consistency. So the vinegar and the baking soda, along with the level moistures from the oil, from the water or the milk if you use milk, and then your oil, which works as an emulsifier as a fat, mixing oil and water, which generally don't mix, but the flour combines the two. When you use baking powder, not baking soda, baking powder reacts to moisture and heat. And what happens is it creates these air pockets in your mixture. And when you add the vinegar to it, which I believe baking powder has cream of tartar in it, which is an acid, and then some of the other ingredients, and it basically creates this foaming action, similar to when you do like the volcano experiments as a kid, and you mix the baking soda and vinegar, and it creates all these bubbles, and it just spontaneously lifts into the air. The baking soda or baking powder in this reaction, I keep saying baking soda. The baking powder in this reaction, we use it because it, like I said, it reacts to moisture and then heat. So the reaction of the two are going to last longer. If you put baking soda in, it's going to dissolve, like the reaction is going to fizz away in like 5 minutes. When you take it out the oven, it's going to be dense and flat. I haven't figured out the science behind the acidities of corn with baking soda and why they mix. But generally speaking, the vinegar is going to react with the baking powder, and it's going to have a double acting process, which is going to create air bubbles in your mixture, which is going to lighten it up and not give you dense, gummy cornbread. So if you weren't using your vinegar, it probably would come out similarly, but it may not rise as much. And like I said, it may have some dents like that. You know how an undercooked cake or something, and it's just like gummy. It's not going to give you that toothsome texture that you want. So I'm still researching in my food nerd world, like the reactions and why they work, in addition to using specific ingredients, which like corn and its reactions. Very interesting. Like, if only I paid more attention in science as a child, it would help.
Right, you're learning it all now. That's fine.
I know. I'm like, darn, I liked chemistry, but why didn't I like it more? I definitely was going to be a journalist and like a Japanese teacher, and then somehow I'm baking. It doesn't. So yeah. But yeah, please use baking soda, baking powder. God, Bre'Anna, baking powder. Use baking powder, non-aluminum, please, because it will taste like aluminum. We don't want that. Yes.
Cool. Kabibi's question is, I'm going to make this with gluten-free flour blend. Are there any adjustments I should make if I substitute the unbleached flour with gluten-free flour blend?
So I thought about this before I made the recipe, because when I started baking, I only knew how to bake gluten-free. Please don't ask me why, because I don't know. I just only bake gluten-free. I would suggest, this is just me like bouncing ideas around my head. If you have buckwheat flour tends to react very well. It plays well with other like gluten-free ingredients. Every gluten-free mix is different. And there's so many variations. You have sorghum, sweet rice flour, brown rice flour. Some use what's it called? Tapioca, arrow starch, garbanzo bean flour. If I'm basing my thoughts around the Bob's Red Mill gluten-free mix, I believe their recipe has garbanzo beans in it. And for some science I can't explain to you because I'm not sciencey enough, it seems that the protein in the bean helps create lift with the corn. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm brainstorming this as we speak. I'll take a look at what gluten-free mix you're gonna use. Or if you put in the chat like which one you're gonna use, I can give you like some ideas as I'm thinking right now. It might work if your mix has almond flour in it, because that the fat from the almond flour, for some odd reason with baking powder specifically, it like helps create that fluffy texture. And a lot of my gluten-free bakes, it works better with baking powder than baking soda. Baking soda is really one note, and like I said, the reaction goes so fast. And when you aerate the mixture and you churn it, you're knocking out all the air bubbles that you need when you bake it to create the lift. and create those gaps in the flour molecule so that it'll be fluffy. All right, let's see. What are you using? So you're gonna use Namaste. Oh, okay. I do like Namaste. It is Namaste, if I remember correctly, I think it's slightly heavy on the xanthan gum. It's like super stretchy, and I think maybe that has to do with the tapioca flour. I don't know if it has xanthan, but I did use Namaste flour before. When you make it, you may want to reduce the amount of oil and water, um, and add a little bit more baking powder. And it's going to be super thick. It's something about baking gluten-free, the batter consistencies that you would think are ideal for like traditional baking are not the same, because each flour in that baking mix has a different absorbency rate, which results in potentially gummy or like an undesirable texture. Gluten-free vegan baking is so interesting. It's so interesting. That would be my suggestion. I would half the recipe. Just always whenever I'm testing a recipe, just half the recipe as best you can. Use Google to your advantage, and see how it goes. But I know with Namaste flour, it creates a super like stretchy dough or batter, and it looks scary, but it'll work. And I do notice with Namaste flour, you kind of have to work it a little bit longer to kind of activate the starch. I've used it to make cookies. I use it a lot to make cookies and to make cake. Um, and yeah, you know what? I would do two experiments. Try to half the recipe and keep the moisture level the same. Reduce the cornmeal by a fourth of a cup, so only be 1 cup, and then do another by reducing the moisture, the amount of water, because that gluten-free mix is really interesting. You got my brain going. Like, this is like what I do at home when I'm alone. I'm like, gluten-free flour, what makes you work how you do? But yeah, do you have any more questions? Any more? Can you say the measurements? Lola's gonna send the recipe after the meeting is over. I don't want to spew them off to you now because, with the internet, you may catch an error, and I want to make sure it's right for you. So fear not, she's gonna send it to you. And if you have more questions or like, go ahead and DM me on Instagram. Lola will have my Instagram, and I'll, we can brainstorm together, because gluten-free baking, especially vegan, it's different. Usually with gluten-free baking, if you're not vegan, you just use lots of eggs, and the eggs works to leaven without the flour. So we're in this together. We're gonna make this work. But if you want to just use something pre-made, I have had success with the Bob's Red Mill gluten-free mix. It works really good.
Nice.
Sometimes I cheat and add a little bit more baking powder to those recipes because they've sat for a while, and the amount of leavening powder, it kind of gets dull after a while because it's been sitting on the shelf for who knows how long. Cheat way to get it to work.
Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. And for those who missed the very beginning, can you share again, like, what's the best way to support your business right now? How can we taste more of Blck Cocoa Bakes?
Yeah, so as of now, you can get cakes from Chili Mustard and Onions, cakes and cheesecakes from Chili Mustard and Onions. I usually have gluten-free cake on Fridays for them. So if you are a gluten-free person, I usually have gluten-free and soy-free desserts on Friday. And at Street Beat, they have different types of fun cheesecakes that you can get. If you want to buy a whole cake, you go to my website and you can have it delivered or do store pickup from our production space in Plymouth. And soon, just based off of this fun interaction today, we'll have more recipes online for you as time goes on, and we can experiment together because that's my favorite thing to do. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Sweet. Yes, Regina, I will
Mm-hmm.
share the full recipe. I'm going to email it to you guys right after, along with her Instagram and
Yes.
contact. Yeah.
The recipe's also on our website, which Lola's gonna send it to you because she's awesome. So you don't need to go there. But if you are dabbling around on there, the very few blog posts we have, the cornbread is one of them. So yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your stories with us.
Yeah.
And I hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. And as soon as, as soon as I hop off here, I'm going to send you guys the recipe, I promise.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you.
You're
And
so
thanks everyone for joining.
welcome. Yeah, thanks everyone for jumping on the call. I hope you were able to get something out of the recipe. If it wasn't the recipe at all, just a fun little hack or tip. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in. This is our first time doing a class, so don't be too harsh on me.
No,
but if,
this is so
but if,
great.
yeah, if you have questions or anything about the recipe or like, more alterations that you may want to do, if it's within means that I can tinker around in my brain, please DM me and I'll see what my brain comes up with. So
Sweet. And also this recording of this class will be on our YouTube in the next week or two. So if you want to revisit some of the tips that Bre'Anna shared.
oh my God, I'm gonna be so nervous to watch it. Like, what were you doing on there?
Great. Cool. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, bye everyone. Have a great Saturday. Happy late New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Greetings.